Jewish Insights with Justin Pines on JBS is made possible in part by the clubs at Pearl River, New York, luxury rental communities for ages 55 and better, now leasing Phase 3 at the Reserve, and the B.L. Manger Foundation.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת זכים גם יוחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת זכים גם יוחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת זכים גם יוחד. הנה מה טוב.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish Insights. Each year, on the Shabbat before Purim, called Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat of Remembering, we read the Torah's command. Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey after you left Egypt. How undeterred by awe of God, he surprised you on the march, when you were famished and weary, and cut down all the stragglers in your rear. Therefore, when the Lord your God grants you safety from all your enemies around you, in the land the Lord your God is giving you as a hereditary portion, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. The rabbis elucidate that the Jews are commanded to always remember Amalek, never forget Amalek, and to eradicate Amalek from this world. 2 years ago, just months after October 7th, I was joined in this studio by Dr. Mijal Bitton in a moment of shock and painful clarity. We spoke about Amalek not as metaphor but as live reality, about enemies who are not rational actors, not partners for negotiation, but forces animated by destruction itself. We spoke about the danger of illusion, about strategy over outrage, about fighting externally while building Jewish resilience internally. And yet the Jewish calendar is not a circle, it's a spiral. We return to the same time in the calendar, but we are not the same people and we are not in the same world. This year, as we approach Shabbat Zachor and Purim, I wanted to check in with Mijal to see where she is and where we are this year and to seek her wisdom. Dr. Mijal Bitton is a spiritual leader, public intellectual, and sociologist. She serves as scholar-in-residence at the Maimonides Fund and Rosh Kehillah of the Downtown Minyan in New York City. A visiting researcher at NYU Wagner, she directed pioneering research on the Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews in the United States. Mijal and I were in the Wexner Graduate Fellowship together, and she became both my friend and my teacher at the Shalom Hartman Institute, where she was a research fellow. She is a Sachs scholar, co-host of the podcast Wondering Jews, and shares weekly reflections on Jewish life, identity, and resilience in her Substack newsletter, Committed. Mijal, I'm so excited to sit with you.
Thanks for having me. Great to be back.
All right, so I'm going to jump in.
I'll just say it's a serious conversation, but we are good friends.
Yes.
So it's like
it's Purim and Zakhor, right? It's the ultimate joy of the holiday, right next to the hardest holiday.
And as you were reading it, Justin, I was almost like getting chills listening to you read the verse out loud.
Yeah.
There's something about that verse of remembrance that I think just is so much of Jewish memory, no matter if you are observant, not observant, how literate you are in the Bible, but this injunction to remember as the core of what it means to be a Jew, it's just so essential.
And it makes me think of all the Zakhors over our time, right? And we think about, the Holocaust, of course, is one that's core for me, but this idea of you need to remember. And I am full of joy because I'm sitting with you, but we're talking about a slightly serious topic.
Yeah.
But I guess we need to find, is there anything more Jewish than finding joy in pain?
And you said spiral, right? That's the word. Purim is you're dizzy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's this happy, sad, what's going on? It's Purim.
Right, exactly. One who enters into Adar is the happiest time of the year. Yeah. So it's a happy time for me. But we do start with Zakhor. It's actually my bar mitzvah parsha as well. Yeah, I was Tetzaveh Zakhor.
Is it like your birthday?
Exactly. Yeah, it's my birthday's in February, but I'm the end of Shvat, so that's when it comes out.
Nice.
All right, so I want to talk about everything. I want to start with a little bit going back to then. You sat here, people have come to me about that interview. A lot of people watched it and commented online, and I want to just check in kind of a little bit of looking back and then a little bit of catch up to today, and that's why I'm so excited to kind of come back. So, I think one of the phrases that I had you translated on the show at the time was the idea of illiberalism, the idea that America and campuses for sure were starting to kind of move away from liberal norms. I asked you to define that. You talked about democratic norms, the idea of having conversation and trying to learn from each other, the idea that in liberal circles Israel could be demonized and there was no space to talk about it. And then the third thing you mentioned alongside that was the idea that kind of, I'm projecting onto you, but like American Jews have become soft a little bit in our 75 years or so of feeling good here. Let's just check in with that. Where are we on those now? What are your reflections?
Yeah, well, maybe we should first remember why that came up.
Sure, please.
In a conversation about Zakhor, right? So one of the questions, so Zakhor, this injunction to remember, I'm going to use words a little bit anachronistically, but we could describe it as the first time that we have this kind of like anti-Jewish hatred that does not seem to have any political or economic or whatever sense behind it.
Right. It's like the Egyptians enslave us and we get it.
Right, yes.
You need pyramids.
You need pyramids. They also enslaved many other people.
Right, exactly.
Right?
But Amalek...
Amalek, it's like we just left Egypt, we crossed the Sea of Reeds, and you've got this nation that has no territorial dispute, no economic dispute, no political, nothing. And they come, they attack, and they go after the most vulnerable. Right? So it becomes this sort of like symbol for the kind of anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, Jew hatred that you look at and you're like, I just don't get it. There's nothing you can gain from this. Why do you hate us so much? Right? Which I think really goes to the core, you mentioned the Shoah, the Holocaust, of so much of Jewish memory.
Sure.
So the discussion that we had on liberalism, illiberalism, interestingly, I think tries to give it almost like tries to give a rationale or a context as to when can this kind of hatred flourish, right? What are the social conditions that can happen that allow for this kind of anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish hatred to really rise up? And I know that I'm not the only one who's observed this, that this did not start in October 7th, 2023, but that for years beforehand, in many spaces in the West, there used to be bastions of protecting classical liberal values, right? Whether it's freedom of expression, respect for differences, the free exchange of ideas, there was a certain illiberalism that rose up and that for many people contributed to the rise of anti-Semitism or anti-Jewish sentiment in places, let's say, like universities or the like.
And but I'll add to yours. It's interesting that you use that framework of liberal versus liberalism. I would say in my head, I've been thinking about more of like truth and not truth, which I know seems crazy, but a little bit around when there is a commitment to search for truth, and maybe we think maybe liberalism is meant to be that our society's healthier, but when truth seems to go down, anti-Semitism seems to rise up. That there's like a causation, almost like evil and we don't care about truth anymore. We're just going to focus on these things because people are saying it. That to me feels a little bit also like a trend that goes alongside. And maybe that is the same as liberalism. Maybe liberalism is is democracy, which is meant to be the search for truth in some way.
Yeah, well, I think part of what you're saying maybe relates to like conspiratorial thinking, which I'm gonna, for the sake of this conversation, say stands in contrast with truth. But it's been very clear that when you look at the rise of anti-Semitism on the right or on the left in America, that it comes hand in hand with conspiratorial thinking. Like the simplest, if you want to have like easy explanations for very complicated things and somebody to blame, right? So Jews are very easily the scapegoat for that, and conspiratorial thinking just thrives when you have unhealthy societies.
Beautiful. I wanted to, you mentioned the left and the right. I feel like last time, the shock of that moment, I think, was the left at the time. Right after October 7th, it felt like there was this like surge in left anti-Semitism that was in your face. You know, I don't want to zoom ahead to today, but just on that particular point, you mentioned now the left and the right. How have you seen that evolve?
Yeah, I think that I mean I've always felt this way. It's not only recent, but I feel like there's no part of the way that I understand Zakhor.
Yeah.
Okay, is that there is no part of society that is immune to what is the virus of anti-Semitism. Rabbi Sachs, who I mentioned last time, my former teacher, he described anti-Semitism as a virus that can mutate. So when you think about it in this way, there's no part of society, right? No political party, no country that can say, you know, we are immune completely. We figured this out. So I think 100% the shock after October 7th, 2023, was to see so much of the opposition come from elite spaces of cultural and knowledge production, I would say, in America and in the West, which is often identified with the left and liberal spaces. But going now to where we are right now, I would believe that most people that I talk to that are thinking about anti-Semitism seriously are seeing it flourish on both sides of the American political spectrum. So for me, it's a little bit less, are you on the right or are you on the left? And it's more, are you seduced by conspiracy theories? And if you are, then it doesn't really matter, who you voted for in the last presidential election. You are likely to be moved by anti-Semitic theories.
Got it. Okay. And then, one of the things that really stuck with me that you shared last time was kind of talking about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And I remember you laid out beautifully that the reasons why the anti-Zionism movement is an anti-Semitic movement, yet within that, there are individuals that aren't necessarily anti-Semitic. And also you're kind of lamenting this conflation of pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas as suddenly becoming one thing like that overnight. Are we in the same place? Has that evolved in some ways? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think this has been a question that has continued to be alive. It has not been resolved in the past few years. And it's also been alive, let's just be honest about it, because there have been significant parts of the American Jewish community that have gravitated towards the anti-Zionist movement, especially, if you look at certain age brackets or certain neighborhoods, let's say in New York, you can find more Jews who would identify as anti-Zionist. So that has made this question especially relevant, because you're like, well, is this the same as anti-Semitism? What happens if you've got, these numbers of Jews that are agreeing with this? So I will continue to insist that at its core, what I'm going to describe as the anti-Zionist movement or anti-Zionist ideology is anti-Semitic. Whether you look at it, you can adopt a point of view that just looks at the consequences and almost like ask yourself, it's like is Hamas happy when this movement does well?
Yeah.
Right? Are they supporting each other?
Sure.
And if so, then I think there's plenty of room to say, if the consequences of your movement are helping those who want to kill Jews indiscriminately, then you could qualify it as a movement that is supporting anti-Semitism. But also, I continue to think, and it's not easy, it's complicated, so please push back. But I think there's a lot of very naive people who might listen to some slogans, might not think them through, might say, my best friends are Jewish, and might be comfortable aligning themselves with an activist movement without actually realizing how much they are being used as a fig leaf for some really ugly things. Does that make sense?
100% makes sense. I think it's not only this issue. I think that's true for a lot of issues. I think people are really swept up in lack of search for truth or anything. It's very easy to kind of get on bandwagons right now.
Yes.
It almost feels social sometimes.
Yeah. So if you were to stop somebody and ask them, do you believe that it's legitimate to kidnap a baby and to hold them underground, they might not say yes right away. Okay, I'm assuming it's not the most extreme kind of ideologically extreme voices, but they might feel comfortable marching in a protest that says by any means necessary.
Right.
And not realize what that means. So I think, unfortunately, we have a lot of movements, but there's some ideologically rigid voices that know exactly what they're saying and what they're doing, and they sweep up a lot of people. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, how do we differentiate, right, between different motivations and attitudes? And sometimes I think it's really important to differentiate, and sometimes I think you just fight the movement, and that's what you have to do.
Beautiful. And I want to get to a little bit of strategy when we talk about today. Just one last question as we look back. I think, one of the things that stuck with me last time was it was a time where people were just kind of writing off young people. It was they've lost their way, the next generation's done, the future of our country is done. I know that you spend time around younger folk. I sound like an old man when I say that, but what are you feeling?
The young ones.
What do you think about what's going on? I know you have people coming to your kehillah, but also people on campus. Like, what are your feelings there? Are you still more positive, or have we gone backwards? Have we gone forwards? Where are we?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I have some very serious concerns about young people, Gen Z in general. Let's put Jews aside for a second. Just the way that social media and algorithms are playing with our minds. Are we raising a generation that is resilient, that can do hard things? I think we have some big questions, and unfortunately, also young people today are going to face the kind of challenges that we haven't. Think about the disruptions that AI is going to bring to the workforce, and is already bringing, for example. When it comes to Jews and young people, I will say two things. Number one, I continue to draw most of my hope and optimism and strength from young Jews that I work with. I continue to be in awe by how so many of them are willing to do hard things, to take difficult stances, to stand up and be countercultural, to say difficult things, to think for themselves. It's really, I'm really proud of that, and it gives me hope for the future. I don't know that I can say this as a matter of numbers. Like, I'm not saying all of our young Jews, right, are behaving this way or are in this situation. But I also don't know if that matters so much. What I mean to say is that most often great wars, whether they're cultural wars or otherwise, are won when you have a small group of people willing to fight hard and to galvanize people behind them. So my recommendation is just to focus on the amazing young people that have risen up, to support them, to let them know that we have their backs, and that we're not just going to do things the way we did them 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I think that in so many spaces we've seen a renaissance of Jewish life, and I'm excited for that to continue.
Beautiful. So I want to hear a little bit about what success looks like in that space, but maybe that's a good segue into kind of more broadly. I invited you back here on purpose. It's been 2 years. I know that all of us, if we have the time and the focus, we prepare for holidays. We think about them a little bit.
Yeah.
There are questions raised by Pesach, by Passover, by Yom Kippur, those kinds of things. Take me into you approaching not only Zakhor, but also the holiday of Purim this year. What are the themes that are on your mind, and how can they help us navigate this moment? Yeah.
So one question or one contrast that I've been thinking about, and I'll be excited to go back and forth with
Chavruta.
you. Yes. But Zakhor, we mentioned Zakhor. You read the injunction at the beginning. It's from the book of Exodus. And there's something about it, Justin, that is so clear, right? It's Moses channeling God, basically saying, there's this thing called Amalek. This is evil. They go after the most vulnerable. No reason for this. You need to understand that there's going to be evil in the world, evil coming after you, and you cannot forget this. You have to eradicate their name and remember this over and over again. There's something about that, the way that I just framed it, that is very clear. I almost find it, what's the right word? There's comfort in the clarity. There's comfort in the ability to say black and white, evil and good.
My 4-year-old, bad guys and good guys.
Exactly.
Right? It's always
right, but there's true
100%.
Not just your 4-year-old, as a grown-up, right?
Like, we wish for that.
Yeah, I'm like, I want that kind of world. Like, sorry, but like Voldemort, Harry Potter. Like, you know who the bad guy is.
Right.
And there's something, okay, all right, I get it. I know how to fight. And then what I was really reflecting about today is actually contrasting that clarity with the Scroll of Esther, which tells the story of Purim. Now, if you read the story of Purim, it is a story that there's like the kids version, but then like there's like I would say like the adult version, like the grown-up version. When you read it, it is dizzying in how much lack of clarity it has. What do I mean by this? You have the bad guy Haman who wants to kill the Jewish people. That's clarity. How do you fight Haman? Who's exactly to blame? How do you think about the empire around you? What kind of Jew do you have to be to survive? All of these things are confusing. They're ambiguous. Do we have salvation? The name of God is not present. There is a book in the Bible, all right? So there's something very, I'm really thinking a lot this year, Justin, what it means that there's certain moments or voices that we can look at something and say, we have clarity, right? So I would say, as an example, October 7th, 2023, right? Mm-hmm. I think most of us, we saw monstrous behavior and we can say this is evil. Mm-hmm. There's no justification. It is terrible. And then we can look at where we are right now, a couple of years later, and there's so many questions that we have between ourselves. Mm-hmm. So how do you fight this? Mm-hmm. Do you go after the left, after the right? Mm-hmm. How do you confront this, mm-hmm. right? And that to me is interesting because it feels, I don't know if you feel this, it feels very honest to what I think we are going through right now. Mm-hmm. That we both have clarity on certain evil that has to be confronted, and then a lot of questions around strategy and theories of change and moving forward that we have to live with.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes total sense. And that's, I mean, I remember even right after October 7th, so much energy. Right. People are like, some people are like, they're sending boots to Israel, like, and collecting as much as possible. Other people are going through and finding out who's saying something anti-Israel and canceling that person and sending a photo. And I'm never going to one of his concerts again, and I'm not going to buy one of her articles of clothing again. Like this whole, like, a lot of energy going somewhere. And then I think, you talked about this a little bit then, which is, how do we be a little bit more strategic here? It's not just about like, when do we go behind the scenes? When do we go in public? What are the different ways to think about it? And so I think, a big piece of this is like, how do you navigate the Purim story is like a political thriller in some ways, right? It's like very complicated and real things are happening. It makes for good television, for lack of a better term. And like, how do you think about those parts? Beautiful.
Yeah, I would also say, like, I think many of us, we spoke about illusions last time also. Yeah. I think many of us had this understandable illusion of feeling, oh my gosh, something is breaking here. Mm-hmm. There's this rupture. There's this terrible thing going on. And we assumed that there would be a moment where we could look back and say we are back to normal. Mm-hmm. And I speak right now as an American Jew. I'm not going to speak about the experiences in Israel. But here in America, I think many of us have come to the slow realization that we are not going back to what happened beforehand. So we've had to be in like crisis mode. How do we react right now? And now we are like in what is also really difficult is like, how do you develop muscles for a new reality that is not like a sprint that is happening with like a lot of energy and everybody's like together, but it's a different kind of reality about the place that you live in and what it means to be a Jew in your country. Mm-hmm. So that I think is also part of the dynamics that we are experiencing right now. And Purim is perhaps the most important story in the Bible for us. It's a story that is based in the diaspora, while most of the Bible is based in the land of Israel. Is a story that does not shy away from the ugliness of anti-Semitism. Is a story that admits you can also have political strength in the diaspora. It's a story that is also confusing about, the government, God. All of these things are ambiguous. And to me, there's something very familiar in that ambiguity right now. It's almost like a mirror that I feel like we're getting to look at a script that resonates in some ways with what we're living through.
Beautiful. I have so much to say. So first, the diaspora front, for sure, it feels like, we had Malka Simkovich on talking about how this was a time where Jews could have gone back. And it's similar today where there's Jews living in America that could, in theory, be living in Israel. And also, though you mentioned before, the lack of God's name. We live in a time where, like, unless you're, I see Hashem, but not everyone necessarily feels like it's a rational thing to see God in our space, I think, for sure. I want to bring up a slight thing that you really triggered for me that I wanted, not in like the modern way, just in the like, it caused my brains to come up, not in an upsetting way. You talked a little bit around that challenge, and you mentioned also that like Purim like is the child level and the adult level.
Oh yeah.
And I think like a big piece of this ambiguity piece for me is how we behave in front of our kids around this. I know you're a mother, I'm a father, we've talked about this. I'll just give an example that I'm sure I don't even know if you're familiar with, but I'll give it to you just to say what I'm thinking through. So we just had the basketball league, the NBA, had their All-Star game this past weekend, and there's a player, Denny, I never say his name right, Avia, who's from Israel, who's on the world team in the All-Star game, and he got to put an Israeli, each person had their world country on the back. He had an Israeli flag on the back of his jersey. And Spike Lee, so Spike Lee, who's known to be a very big basketball fan, he sits courtside at every Knick game, wore an outfit that had like Palestinian flags all over it. And I actually, as background, you talk about anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, at least it wasn't a Hamas flag, I guess, but he came to speak at Penn 20 years ago, and I left the room being like, that guy hates Jews. Wow.
And I read it down?
And yeah, he was just making all these one-off comments about Jews in Hollywood kind of thing, just like big stereotype stuff that I just like, he was a guest speaker. I just came to like hear a famous director speak in communications, what I studied, and I was just like, I just had no idea that was coming. I was uncomfortable. All of that aside, that's its own discussion about what's going on there. People like, he shouldn't be invited back to the Garden. That's its own thing. The All-Star game was on. We were among friends. My daughter, who's a big basketball fan, loves basketball. She's 10 years old, was watching. One of the adults in the room was like, going crazy about the Spike Lee thing, because that's where a lot of people are out, and like was trying to like point it out to the kids, right? And just be like, look what he's doing. And like, I very much tried to nip it in the bud, and maybe I did or didn't. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but it goes back to that first point you made, which is like around like the comfort in America as a Jew, and this moment of feeling like our institutions and the things we care about are never going to be the same. And like, it made me think about like, is it my obligation to tell my 10-year-old, look what's happening at the game, instead of being excited there's an Israeli player on, notice that this famous person in the front row is quote unquote protesting a person who just happens to be Israeli in the game, and I need to tell her that, and now basketball is politics for her because she needs to join the war. We're in a war right now. And in Israel, they don't have that option, right? It's like everyone's in the war, or is there an element of like, am I meant to imagine things are the way they were, at least for my children, to protect them in some way?
A different way of asking the same question, Justin, is Zakhor, the injunction, is heavy. And it's like, at what age are Jewish parents supposed to turn to their kids and have that talk and say, from the beginning of us being a people, there are those who targeted us for no reason. And part of what it means for you to be a Jew is to know that. And I think that's a big question. I think I also, there's interesting questions like, when do you teach your kids about the Holocaust? And I know that your grandparents.
All four.
Right, so I think it's a little bit different if it's in your family, but if it's not, like how do you talk about it? When do you talk about it? Who's the kid facing you? It's a little bit different also depending on the child. But yeah, it's dizzying also because it's like, look at Spike Lee, but also like, look at this Israeli player, you know?
Right.
And like LeBron James saying he wants to go to Israel.
Right.
Like, it's not, there. It's dizzying. There's something there that is like, you also don't want to, I don't want to raise kids right now who are only feeling embattled and feeling like everyone's out to get them. I don't think that's true.
Right.
And I also don't think that that it's going to shape them in the way they need to be shaped right now. But the question resonates. With Purim, by the way, what I'll tell you is I can't remember when it was for me, how old I was. I was a teenager, but I don't know how old. But one year it's like Purim, the costumes, the this, the that. And the next year I like read the story really carefully. And I realized, oh my gosh, there's like a woman who's taken against her will. And basically you have like sexual violation in this story. And all these little girls are like dressing up like Queen Esther. And also reading it carefully and being like, oh my gosh, this could have ended in the genocide of the Jewish people. And it's the happiest holiday in the Jewish calendar. And there's something there about us like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if you ever had like a hard time with Purim.
Yeah.
Right? Which is like, I'm celebrating, I'm eating this and that, and I'm reading what is arguably the darkest story in the Bible at the same time. Did you ever have that or not really?
So I would say that for me, sometimes I almost see Purim as like the opposite in some ways. I know Yom Kippur is supposed to be that, I guess, but to me, like, when I get to the month of Adar, I almost feel like a mitzvah to be happy.
Well, it is a
right. No, but literally, but I don't even know if it is a mitzvah. It says Mishi Nichnas Adar. It says like one who enters. It almost sounds like descriptive more than prescriptive.
Okay.
But to me, it's almost like throwing in the towel in some ways. It's almost like saying like the world is so insane and upside down in all different ways. Like, can we just like have a time to just be like just smile? And so I don't want to sound like the Joker in like a Batman movie or something like that, but just be like, every crazy thing's happening around us. Can I just focus on God and just be like,
right.
I'm in joy with you. I'm in the moment of joy here, and like it's gonna be happy. And I need to just like accept that and lean into that, even though I'm all this lack of clarity and challenges around us.
Right, and this gets, by the way, to some big contemporary debates, right? Mm-hmm. So I mentioned there's all of these questions the Megillah brings up.
Yeah.
So for example, right now a big debate, and there's different flavors of this debate, is how do we respond to the normalcy and rise of anti-Semitism? Mm-hmm. And you've got, I'll mention a couple of debates, okay? Mm-hmm. There's some people that argue, well, do you, one flavor of it is like, do you distinguish anti-Zionism from anti-Semitism? Do you try to like have different strategies? Okay, we touched on that. A different big debate that's emerged is, how much do you prioritize trying to fight anti-Semites or change their minds versus just like focus on building strong Jewish communities and a little bit what you said about like, I'm gonna focus on God and joy, right?
Yeah.
And like focus on Jewish joy and Jewish religious experience, right? So there's like all of these questions that Purim and the Megillah represent that are completely alive in the questions that we are asking ourselves and that are grappling with right now.
Beautiful, and I'll add to that. I think one of the things, two things that I think about. One is a famous essay by David Hartman that we've, I'm sure both of us know like the back of our hand. Auschwitz versus Sinai, which I know is mostly about Israel, not about fighting anti-Semitism, but just this sense of what drives us when we get out of bed each morning. Is it Auschwitz is our North Star, or is Sinai representing, the covenant, the idea of, Torah and the laws and what, the Jewish mission, let's say. And I think that for me is always, as someone who grew up in a home that was all about Zakhor and the Holocaust and never again, this whole, it's not enough to protect Jewish bodies. We need to actually clarify what the Jewish mission's about. That comes up for me big time. And then also Purim's mitzvahs. The Purim has like the 4 big M's, right? So the Megillah we have to read, but it's also about Mishlach Manot and Matanot Evyonim. I'll translate, thank you. Like giving gifts to friends to enhance the fabric of our society. Also giving gifts to the poor to enhance the fabric of our society. And then Mishteh, the idea of having a big banquet to like, also, I think a communal moment where you're inviting people going in and out of each other's homes. So it feels like inherent in Purim is this message of like, it's usually they tried to kill us and I guess we survived, but here it's like they tried to kill us, we survived, and we need to build the fabric of our community. That's how we stay resilient to that.
Yeah, I think there's consensus there. I'll add, by the way, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs used to talk about Jewish humor as a response to tragedy, right? So for him, it wasn't like a coincidence. There was something powerful. It's resilient. It's countercultural. It's to be able to look at the world and laugh. And that's what I heard you when you were talking about Purim, right? It's like, it's to look at the world and we're laughing.
Explosions all around, all smile. Although I do think...
Not like in a weird way.
No, of course. Yeah, again, not like the Joker and Batman, like I said. That's what I'm imagining. And I know we're not focusing on Israel. It's definitely not my expertise. But to me, it feels like since October 7th, from what I've seen, Israel's doing a much better job of that than America. It feels like people are like, thank God the hostages are all returned or home, but there's an ability to go and be besimcha, joy, to have the wedding and to like find joy in life and recognize that like this isn't going away. In America, it feels to me, again, I'm making a massive generalization, but it feels more like a head down thing and less of a, joy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I would also agree with the generalization. I would agree with you. I attribute it a little bit more to being in a culture when you expect certain hardships. I'll explain in a second. Versus being in a culture when you thought you were like in the happily ever after.
Yes.
So one of the things, and I wrote about this in my Substack this year for the Torah portion of Noach, but I think part of what's paradoxically made us weaker as American Jews is that we bought in completely to this notion of American Jewish exceptionalism, which is a term that scholars use when they try to explain this sense that a lot of American Jews had that America was like the exception to history, right? So it's like we went through so much, we were always hated, whatever, Zakhor, and in America, we do not have to be nervous about this anymore.
Yes, we won.
We won, right? We won.
Who needs a Messiah, Mashiach? We did it. We made it.
Yeah, but I want to take it seriously.
No, a golden age for sure.
It's like I want to take it seriously. Like in America, Zakhor is a memory. It's not about your neighbor. It's about your grandparents' neighbors. Okay? And I think paradoxically, when you tell yourself that you will have no hardships, right? You don't build the muscles to then face the hardships and be able to do them and still live life with happiness. In Israel, I think the psychology has been very different. From the beginning, so many of like the early Zionists spoke about like you will have to keep fighting, right? And it's not, you have not reached this like end of history in some way. And I think that that's created a certain resilience and muscles that are able to go through tremendous hardships and to almost simultaneously have joy. My first visit to Israel after October 7th, I remember going to Hostage Square, which thank God is not the same anymore. But back then it was when all the Chatufim were, most of them were still taken. And I remember just seeing some like young kids having pizza and doing like a hangout, sitting on like one of the walls with like all the memorial things. And it didn't feel like a desecration. It felt like this Israeli ability
Right.
to like,
do it somehow, balance both.
do it at the same time, yeah. And I think there's something there that I know that I want to learn from more.
Right.
And I want my kids to learn from more because it makes you able to go through really difficult things.
Beautiful. All right, you mentioned a little bit thinking about strategy and leadership and how we respond. I want to bring us back to Purim. We have, you'll tell me if there's more, but certainly Mordechai and Esther as two archetypes of different ways to lead in these moments. Just what are your reflections on them?
Oh, there's so much there. I'm just writing down. I'll just say, so it's also interesting, Justin, because it depends which Mordechai and which Esther.
Yeah.
What I mean to say is that Jewish tradition, we can read the Scroll of Esther and read about them, and then there's a way that the sages and later commentaries have depicted them, right? So for example, they make of Mordechai a very pious man, a rabbi, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, you can read the text, and he's actually more of like a political operative. So there's like real questions there. When you read the Scroll of Esther, Esther is this woman who's taken to the palace, and she's fairly assimilated, right? The sages describe Esther as keeping the Sabbath and eating kosher, and they give almost like a different depiction of who she is. But if I were to look at them just from the way the Scroll of Esther describes them, then I think they present us, maybe instead of sharing like a portrait of them, I'll mention the questions that I think they bring up for us, okay?
Great.
So maybe one question for each. And my first question is going to be annoying. I'm going to say it in a way that is maybe provocative and annoying. But one question that I think you can reflect if I'm doing.
It's just a great.
I'm just saying.
No, of course.
I'm just naming that I'm trying to trigger you. Okay, let's see if I can do it.
Great.
Okay, you're gonna tell me no, it's not annoying, and then I'll have failed. But Mordechai, right? So the story really, in many ways, begins with Mordechai, who refuses to bow down to Haman, right? And then Haman basically takes this plot. He's got this hatred against this one Jew, and he extends it against the Jewish people. Now, there's a couple of ways to read Mordechai, and I just want to present them. One way is to say, wow, he was a principled man who did not want to bow down to Haman because of idolatry or other reasons, and Haman went completely nuts and, total anti-Semite in basically taking his enmity against one man and extending it to everybody. There's another way to look at Mordechai, and this is where I'm being annoying. And it's to say, did he really have to do that? Like, couldn't he just behave a little bit better and realize that he's dealing with a madman that can go after the Jews and just maybe play the game a little bit, maybe avoid being there when Haman's going by? Do you get what I'm trying to ask you?
Totally, yeah. Be a little more. You don't have to like fight back for the sake of fighting back in the moment, if that makes sense. If it's going to make it worse.
Right, or like, don't you realize the stakes?
Right.
For Jews as a minority.
Right.
You're
You're putting everyone else's life at risk.
Right. So I'll tell you the question that comes up for me, and you can tell me if it resonates or not. I think some of the conversations that we are having very often is, are there things that we can do or not do to minimize anti-Semitism? Right, going back to Zakhor.
Right.
So a big debate or question that people have is, if Israel would tell if only Israel would tell its story better. Right? Or
Israel just needs a better PR team.
Better PR team.
The world would be perfect.
Okay?
Yeah.
Or like better diplomacy.
Yeah.
And by the way, I half agree with that. I think Israel needs a better PR team and better diplomacy. But there's like a real question there, right? Or like, if only Jews were a little bit less visible, right? Then maybe we could contain this a little bit. So I think Mordechai as a character brings up the big question, right? Of like, how much do our actions have to do with things or not? By the way, reading the Scroll of Esther, it's clear to me that Haman could have taken the actions of any Jew who slights him at any time for any reason, and just like, create something out of it. But I think there's questions that come up with that.
I want to respond to that before we go to Esther. So the way I often think about this is like, there's like the anti-Semitism is going to be there no matter what, either way. And there's like, I don't want to call it blame, because I think you taught me last time it's not about blaming the Jews for anti-Semitism, but I want to split it into kind of two categories here. One is like, what are things, external actions that lead to anti-Semitism in the world, and the other is what are internal actions. So, one of the big ones after October 7th was the sense of like, well, internal fighting in Israel didn't cause October 7th, God forbid, but there was something wrong with the fabric of society, and then we had a tear in the fabric. And, the American equivalent I hear is that Jews became political party members and not Jewish members anymore. It became, I'm a Democrat, you're a Republican, not me and you, but you know what I'm saying? That's my religion now. I don't care that we share the Judaism thing in common anymore. I would say, the thing that to me, and I don't know if you have comments on this or not, but what's going on with Epstein right now feels like, and focusing on Epstein feels even worse than focusing on the people who are victims, who should, their privacy should be protected to the extent they want. But the sense that there's like this massive ripple effect across all of society that starts with a Jewish person, it makes me feel, I just like, why, guys, just like, don't, like, just please behave in a way that is like a Kiddush Hashem and not a Chilul Hashem. Like, how do we do that? So to me, it feels like there's all those elements in the, like, how do our leaders, quote unquote, with Mordechai, show up in a world that either anti-Semitism is going to be there with or without them, or the way they treat fellow Jews, or the way they present to the public is a way that increases.
But I like how you're putting it. You're distinguishing between victim blaming and between saying we can have a sober account of how we weaken ourselves. The rabbis, by the way, were very into this, the sages, right? So after Rome conquers Jerusalem and destroys the temple, the rabbis have the chutzpah to take the Roman Empire and make it almost like a footnote.
Yes.
And be like, actually, it was because the Jews fought each other and we weakened ourselves. But they still blame Rome, and they don't give Rome a pass, but they insist on agency. And that's part of like the rabbinic move, to insist that even when we are vulnerable and struggling, we have agency and we can make things better. And Mordechai, by the way, could be, people read him in different ways. So some people, for example, read him as himself having an evolution throughout the story. So let's imagine the following. We could imagine that at the beginning, and the first time I heard this was from my friend Shraga Baron from Hartman, Jerusalem. Sure. But you could imagine that at the beginning, Mordechai is almost like an assimilated Jew that has this like Persian name, Marduk, right? And he's not thinking as a Jew. He's thinking, there's this rivalry between me and Haman, I am not going to bow down, right? He's not having those interests. And then when he sees what happens, he becomes Mordechai Yehudi. He becomes the Jew. And then he has his own transformation. in which he, and I think Shraga compared him like to the myth of Herzl, which again, it's myth and history complicated with the Dreyfus affair, right? When you move from being a private citizen to realizing, like, actually there is greater forces around me, and I can stand up right now as a Jew, and I can be part of saving my people. So that's another way to think about this. And if we take this read, then Mordechai and Esther, to some extent, are also like October 8th Jews, you know? Like all those Jews that we point at and we say, paradoxically, and not in any way that any of us like, Jew hatred and anti-Semitism can actually make the space to awaken individuals and to make them realize they could stand up as Jews.
Beautiful.
And respond in different ways.
Amazing. All right, take me into Esther.
Esther's so interesting. Oh, come on. It's like we could spend hours on this.
Yeah.
Esther's so interesting. Esther is this... It's so funny because we bring psychology to characters that we don't know if it's true or not. Yeah. But Esther stands off as this incredibly passive woman who's just like being acted upon and taken. And you imagine her as like this king's plaything in the harem who like can really do nothing. And then of course there's that amazing encounter she has with Mordechai, right? In which, by the way, when I was a kid, I thought they were talking to each other. Then when you learn more, you realize she's in the harem. She's not allowed to talk to him. It's all happening through an intermediary.
Right, they're passing notes.
Right? Yeah, they're passing notes, but it's very dramatic. And Mordechai tells her, if you do nothing, if you decide to not intervene for the Jews, we will be okay. By the way, I don't know how he says that, and I don't know if post-Holocaust how we feel about that. But he says, we will be okay as the Jews, but you and your family will be lost. And who knows if it's not for this precise reason that you've come to monarchy. There's so much here. I'll name maybe one question and then one idea that I'm sitting with. One question I'm sitting with is, it's like we spoke before about debate that is happening. Do we respond to anti-Semitism by investing in Jewish life? Right? Do we respond to it by trying to change hearts and minds? Another debate, by the way, is do we respond to it by going back inside our communities or actually engaging with potential allies? And I think Esther, and I'd love to hear what you think, I think Esther is the model of what happens when you have to invest in relationships with others. Like the reason she's able to save the Jewish people is because of her access to the halls of power that she wouldn't have gotten as like a Jew who's only in the Jewish community and hanging out with Jews. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
100%. I think this is like a big question of American Judaism, right? And Epstein's the opposite of that. Obviously, it's someone who got access to power and used it to do terrible things. But the idea is, all the Jews who are like, you know what, we don't need campuses.
Right.
I'm not going to colleges anymore.
Right, exactly.
I'm just going to have my kid join the family business and stay local and do our thing. It's like, wait, no one's going to be in government anymore. No one's going to be doctors alongside other doctors anymore. No one's going to be, in government, like in like all those things. So there's a big challenge there for sure.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about Esther also is that she leans into her role in the palace, right, and her relationship. In essence, the fate of the Jewish people hangs in the balance of who the king, Achashverosh, is going to love more, Haman or Esther, right? It's crazy. It's crazy. It's dizzying. But she also draws spiritual strength from the Jewish community, right? She tells Mordechai, have them pray, have them fast, and she knows that they are doing that as she goes forward. So I think she both represents the refusal to abdicate our role in engaging with society, and also the knowledge that we will draw strength from our community while we do that. You know what I mean? So doing both at the same time.
Beautiful.
And not...
There's a Torah lesson there, right? You gotta and tefillah, right? You gotta do your work, and you also gotta pray, but not just pray. In that case, you're saying pray in a way that engages the community.
I think she draws her strength from knowing there's a community behind her.
Beautiful.
Right? She can't move forward without that. She can't face the anti-Semites and try to win the political game.
Right. So I'll ask you on that also. One of the key pieces of that is the idea of that. It's not a rational argument. It's not like let me explain to you why the Jews shouldn't be killed, right? It's this idea, and I think that's like they say it's not what you know, it's who you know kind of thing. Like as you think about the world we're in today, is it just simply like the idea of rational debate is never going to get us there because people don't care about facts, and it's really we need to invest in relationships? I assume you're going to say it's a balance because we know each other. But like, how do you think about that question?
I would hate to live in a world where where we cannot rationally talk about anything.
Same.
But I do think Purim in many ways makes the case that interests matter more than values in survival. Right? It's a cynical book.
Yeah.
Because part of the cynicism, Justin, I think, comes that we're also confused by Achashverosh. Right? Is this, and again, depending what kids' book you read or what depiction, you either come away thinking it is a drunkard who's a buffoon, who's just driven by like his lust and his desire for food, and you can manipulate him in this way. Or there's other reads that show him as somebody who's trying to like play off different parts of his empire in order to like have power. So as opposed to Haman, who's the kind of like anti-Semite that has no rationale, no anything, right? Achashverosh is a little bit more confusing. I think Achashverosh is the more common character. Like I think there's more Achashveroshes in the world than Hamans. The hard part is what happens if Achashverosh listens to Haman, right? That's the dangerous kind of a thing. But some of the questions that I know we are asking ourselves, and I don't want to pretend there's an easy answer, is I think for a long time we thought it was a matter of values, the way that we fought anti-Semitism. It was to make the case based on values. And there's some people who say that we made serious mistakes, and that actually as American Jews, we should be thinking much more about interest. And how do we align? It's much more, what's the word? Instrumental. Like it's much more...
Effective?
No, I'm just saying there's something much more cynical about it, right? It's much more like...
utilitarian.
Yeah, utilitarian. I forgot. Yeah. There's another word that will come to me.
It's sad in some ways, and it's reality. There's a sense of like, if everyone just like understood the facts, we could do X, Y, Z, but instead it's like, no, that's not the game we're playing. We're playing a totally different game. It's about relationships.
Yeah, I mean, so totally different topic, but I'm reading this wonderful biography of Churchill right now. Okay. And when you read about Churchill, and he was one of the earliest people to see the evil of Nazi Germany, and then he has to fight this war, which at the beginning was very unclear that they were going to defeat Germany, and he has to constantly make decisions based on interests. So, for example, he was also very opposed to communism, but at a certain point, he forms an alliance with Stalin because he realized that the most important thing is to defeat the Nazis and that everything will eventually come through afterwards, but that he needs to rely on interest to survive, right? To defeat Germany and then to move forward. And you use the word sad. I think we hate that. I think we would like to imagine that we can secure our interests in a way that is morally pure. And that does not ask us to get into bed literally with Achashverosh, right? And I don't know if the story of Esther, I don't think it supports that. I think the story of Esther asks us to consider real politics and that's also part of the dizziness, right?
All right, in our closing few minutes here, I want to give you an opening to kind of, bring this together. I'll add a couple questions and then I'll just let you flow. Okay. So one is we didn't go deep on the sense that God is absent. So I want to put that data point out there for you in the world that we're in today. The second data point I want to mention is I had Yael Ziegler on recently. We're talking about writing in Tanakh, the idea of when do actually Jews do the act of writing. And I believe the first and the last. The first is Moshe being commanded to write the story of Amalek, the story that we read on Zakhor. And the last is Esther saying to write the story down and like what's going on there. And then I'll say kind of as a bow in the middle, is there, simple Mijal, is, I know you can handle it, is looking forward, what's your kind of constructive note to think about this moving forward? So you can play with all of those and however you want, but I'll give you the floor. And, give me a few
God's absence, the writing of books, all together.
They could be separate, or you can answer them in parts if you want. But this sense, I guess I'll frame it as the world we're in today, where God isn't necessarily tangible for the average person, and this importance of why this is the story we need to tell. We need to God stops in the middle of the Torah and says, wait. we crossed the sea. It doesn't say God doesn't say write down that we just crossed the sea. But Amalek, God says write this down. So this seems like it's an important lesson.
Yeah.
And then how do we take what the significance of that lesson? What's the constructive advice?
Well, maybe related to the first two questions, people read God's absence in different ways. By the way, one understanding is that it was a political choice by Mordechai and Esther, who are writing under the auspices of the Persian Empire, and they need to write it in code, right? But I actually, to me, there's something very, to me, the Scroll of Esther is the most modern of all the books in the Bible, because we live in a reality where unless we look for God, God is absent, right? Like there's no earth opening up and swallowing bad people. There's no voice coming from Sinai and telling us what to do. To me, this doesn't mean that God is absent. It means that unless we decide to seek God, we won't find God. And there's something there that is true to the human condition. And I would say, for some of us, it might feel almost terrifying. Like, what do you mean? I wish God was here. And I don't just mean God like in a religious, faithful term. I mean like clarity. I wish the world was more clear. But I also think it opens up the space for covenant. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs and others have written a lot about the fact that part of what it means to be a Jew, right? It's that we don't just step back and God writes Jewish history for us. We are meant to partner with God. We are meant to seek God. We are meant to figure out how to bring clarity into confusing and ambiguous situations. So I think the absence of God presents a challenge and an opportunity for a mature, difficult, sophisticated, joyful, amazing Judaism that we can access. I'll add two other things to your questions, Justin. You mentioned before the interesting thread around writing. So the injunction to remember Amalek is the first time that the Bible gives a commandment to a human to write down something, and then the Scroll of Esther is the last book that is canonized in the Hebrew Bible, right? Interestingly, they are related not just in their similarity, but in the tractate of Megillah, in the Talmud, we are told that there was a real question if the Scroll of Esther would be canonized. We mentioned it's a complicated book. It's a beauty pageant. There's no God. You know what I mean? It's Jews in the diaspora when the temple's already built. There were some concerns that it wasn't the most pious book to be included. And one passage in the Talmud describes Esther as making the case for why the Scroll of Esther should be included. And she actually ties it to that initial injunction. I'm paraphrasing here the words of the Talmud. But in essence, she says that first time that Moses was told, you must write down what Amalek did, right? One of the ways to fulfill that is to include the Scroll of Esther and to canonize it and to let me write it. So I think there's a really interesting sweep of Jewish memory there, and very big challenging questions for us as educators and parents about what does it mean that there's so much emphasis put in writing about something that is arguably dark and serious. The last thing I'll say, Justin, is I'll go back to something you said earlier. I think that the Scroll of Esther is fascinating and it is dizzying and ambiguous, and we can read things and ask questions. But as you mentioned, at the end, we come to a place that includes a set of commandments that are not ambiguous, that are not amorphous, and that have consensus to them. We are basically told, this is the way that I'm understanding it, you're going to live in dizzying stories that are going to remind you of this Scroll of Esther. But there's one thing that you can always have agency on. You can't always control which king you have. You can't always control if you have Esther in the palace. You can't always control those things. You can control whether you have built solidarity and social bonds between yourselves. You can control between the Jewish people if you're able to think of yourselves as a people, not as one that is dispersed all over, but one that is responsible for each other. And every one of the commandments, there's 4 commandments given at the end of the Scroll of Esther. Every one of the mitzvot, of the deeds that we do in the holiday of Purim, are there literally to build social bonds between people, between Jews. And to me, that is the most important thing. We can spend hours talking about what makes us dizzy, uncomfortable, what's complicated, and it's true. And we can also disagree. You can have one theory of change, I can have another, and we can go back and forth. What is unambiguous is that no matter what challenge we face at what time and in what place, we will be best served by making sure that we have social solidarity, that we're strengthening each other, and that we have the most potent bonds of Jewish peoplehood. That is, in essence, what Mordechai and Esther tell us. Everything else can be ambiguous, but if there's one thing you're going to take out of this, how you respond to Amalek, how do you prevent Amalek, how do you fight Amalek, how do you have joy, is by making sure that you invest in the Jewish people. And I think that that's something we need to remind ourselves over and over again, whether it's right after October 7th, 2 years out, in Israel, in America, that we have the agency, the possibility, and the responsibility to strengthen the bonds between us and to make sure, like you said, that we are as strong as possible internally with whatever challenges come.
Beautiful. Mijal, thank you so much. Such a treat. Wishing you a Purim Sameach.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Purim Sameach.